Hi folks, weekly video from, where am I? Minnesota. Did take a moment to think about it. Back in the US. So I came over to Minnesota, when was it? Friday last week. That's right, because I pushed this video out a little, or rather the last video out just a little bit earlier before I left Oz. So came over to Minnesota. Holy crap, that was a long flight. I had to go from Brisbane to Sydney, not too bad. Sydney to Dallas. And I ended up having the longest time sitting on an aeroplane I've ever had in my life, because we got on the A380, the Qantas plane, and barreling down the runway, and then they put on the brakes and decided that a door wasn't shut properly. Gets better to figure out then than when you're in the air. Back to the terminal, sit there for a couple of hours before doing one of the longest flights in the world as well. So I think I was on the plane for 18 point something hours. I missed the connecting flight into Minnesota from Dallas, so then had to get the next one. Bottom line was 30 hours door to door. So I think everyone knows Australia's on the other side of the world and it's a long way away, but that was an exceptionally long way away. So came here rather tired. Had a very nice weekend though. It was really sunny on the weekend, and I spent pretty much all the Saturday afternoon sitting around at a brewery in the sun on the grass drinking beer, which was actually really, really nice. So what have I done whilst I've been here? NDC Minnesota has been on. It's right in the final hours of it at the moment. I've obviously left there and come to a hotel to try and actually catch up on all the things that I've been neglecting whilst I've been NDCing. And NDCing has meant doing Hack Yourself First on Monday and Tuesday. So that's another one of those done. Incidentally, I'm going to be in New York Monday and Tuesday next week doing Hack Yourself First there. So there are still tickets available for that as well. I'm going to link to that. Did Hack Yourself First Monday, Tuesday, did the opening keynote for NDC on Wednesday morning, which was yesterday morning my time here. And that was really good. I'm going to come back and talk about that in a moment because it's going to lead into the next thing I want to talk about. So I did that. First thing in the morning, came back to the hotel to try and finish my PubConf talk. So PubConf is a really, really cool event that we have been running around the NDC events for the last few years, which is basically like go to a pub, do a lightning talk, which is a 5-minute talk with slides that you prepare, 20 slides, 15 seconds each, auto progression. You have to go there in front of a whole bunch of, what's the right way of putting it, lubricated attendees who are having a nice time drinking beers in a very fun atmosphere. Nothing recorded, all off the record. You can be a lot more risque than what I would get away with doing in a normal talk. And I did that today. We have 10 speakers, all went through back to back. I did, you had to actually base this one on a movie, on an animated movie. So I did a whole series on using emojis for passwords and things I can't really talk about on something that's going to be published on the World Wide Web. But if you get a chance to come to a PubConf somewhere, come and do that. I did make it through to the final 3, which is good. So they're like the 10 people do their thing, and then the audience gets to vote on the ones they like the most. So made it through the final 3. I have been in the final 3 before, and just as before, I came last out of the final 3 because what happens then is you've got to do a talk on a slide deck you've never seen before. And apparently my talks on slide decks that I prepare are actually pretty good. Slides which other people have prepared that I've never seen, my talks, not so good. However, I still got to walk away with a bottle of whiskey. So that's something. Anyway, so that was good times. I spent today kind of trying to recover, not because it was a big night. I was actually home at a reasonable hour and I behaved myself quite well, but travel does really take a toll. So I literally fell asleep on the bed just after lunch today, just absolutely, run down, I guess. Not feeling too bad though. Now, leads me into other things. I want to talk about my keynote because that's going to then flow nicely through into a whole bunch of stuff today, coincidentally related around crypto and TLS and HTTPS and all these kind of wonderful geeky things. I did this talk, which was recorded. It will be up on YouTube, I assume, in the coming weeks. And one of the things I talked about was the way certificates are changing insofar as the rise and rise of Let's Encrypt. I'm going to talk much more about these guys in a moment. And also around how some of the commercial CAs have behaved as Let's Encrypt has effectively started to threaten their business model. And in fact, the part of the talk that comes to mind immediately is I sort of talk about the fact that, Let's Encrypt comes along, starts doing certificates for free. You used to pay the likes of Komodo money for them. And what was kind of interesting, and I wanted to get across to the audience, is the way these incumbent certificate authorities tried to defend what is effectively a dying business model, charging money for certificates. And Comodo, bless them, back in late 2015 tried to trademark the name Let's Encrypt. And I show the trademark up on the screen actually, and I show Let's Encrypt's sort of response to this, where they have to talk about defending their brand. And like that's a dick move enough, right? Like trying to trademark a competitor's brand in order to try and drive them out of business. Like there's no two ways about it. That was inevitably the objective. What made it even worse is someone raising this on the Comodo forum, and the CEO of Comodo at the time, Melai, and I can't pronounce his last name, but Melai effectively responded to someone raising their concern. The person raising the concern said something like, why would you try to trademark someone else's name? And Mello's response was, how can you prove it was them who made it up? As in, how can you prove it was Let's Encrypt that made up the name Let's Encrypt? Anyway, fortunately that trademark was later withdrawn, and obviously Let's Encrypt as a name has stuck. But it's behaviour like that. And the thing that really frustrates me is we just see this over and over and over again. In fact, I'm going to do things out of order to the notes I made here because it actually flows a little bit more cleanly this way. I noticed during the week, whilst I was doing my workshop, must have been on Monday, noticed someone quote tweeted a tweet from PC Mag, which dated back to about October, so it's not super fresh, but it quote tweeted a link to, quote tweeted their tweet with a link to an article that is on PC Mag, and incidentally a bunch of people who chimed in on this thread said, I didn't know PC Mag is still a thing. It is. The quality of their content though is what we're about to discuss. So this is an article written by a guy called David Brame, and I'm going to mention David a bit as we go through this as well. The title of it is Top SSL Certificates Buyer's Guide. So basically, how you should go and buy your certificates, who you should buy them from. Now, Daniel, did I say David or Daniel? It's Daniel, I'm looking at his profile. Daniel goes through and sort of defines what is a certificate, so on and so forth, what are my options, like there's a bunch of stuff in here that's pretty generic, maybe not the most technically accurate, but not too bad. But then you get down into the three types of certificates, which are obviously going to be DV, OV, EV. Now DV, he says, ranging in cost from free to cheap, such as GeoTrust Quick SSL Premium Option or Rapid SSL's offering, bit of name dropping. This kind of SSL certificate is fine for internal projects, but not acceptable for the open web. Use extreme caution on websites that use this kind of certificate. In fact, you're probably best off clicking away from them as fast as you can. That means don't use Google anymore. It's like this is just the most bullshit, ridiculous misunderstanding of not just the way DV works, but the fact that like 95%, asterisk, not sure the exact number, but it's just a freaking huge one, of the web served over HTTPS uses DV. It is just an absolutely ridiculous, baseless statement. And it seems to have stood the test of time since, well, yeah, this is interesting. Well, this is interesting. I've just noticed that, okay, so that the tweet from PC Mag was October, and I've just noticed the article date here says May the 6th, 2019. May the 6th being 3 days ago when we started making issue of this. I wonder if this is referring to like an edit date or something. But if it was edited, why didn't he edit out the bullshit? Anywho, so talks about that, talks about OV and EV. Some of the stuff on here is kind of crazy. So let's get onto some of the weird stuff. I'm really tempted to actually write something just tearing this apart, because there are things like here was the one that really got me. Right at the end of this, he says you usually get what you pay for with certificates. So basically implying that as you spend more money, you're going to get something better, which of course is also bullshit. Now, under that, we have a links to a whole set of different certificate authorities, commercial ones, of course. There's a link to GoDaddy, $69.99. Now, there's a big button here that says see it, and maybe it's coincidental, but it does seem to be an affiliate link. Symantec, you probably, yeah, do you want to get searched from Symantec? Entrust Datacard, who's just been absolutely atrocious with a lot of their communication. Network Solutions, DigiCert, Sectigo, formerly Komodo CA, formerly Komodo. I wonder if this is what's been edited, actually, because the Sectigo name is actually quite recent. Oh, you know what? I'm going to go to archive.org later on and figure that out, because if they've gone back and started editing things like this but haven't edited out the bullshit, I'll be very interested in that. They go on, and I guess the curious thing is there's no Let's Encrypt. Now, what did I actually say about this the other day? Because it's just infuriating the hell out of me, and you'll understand why more in just a moment as well. I quote tweeted this: "How on earth did PC Mag manage to publish a piece on certificate authorities and only focus on the paid ones without a single mention of Let's Encrypt? Can you comment on this gleeful mischief," which is the author's Twitter handle, "to conclude that you usually get what you pay for is grossly misleading?" So a bunch of people chimed in on this. Certainly a lot of people had things to say about this. This tweet was liked 688 times. And the general consensus was obviously this was a paid piece. Now, to his credit, as I say, it was David or Daniel? The author, Daniel, apologies Daniel, the author did actually chime into some of these questions that were raised, and he was very polite and he took that information on board, so I want to give him credit for that. Unfortunately, what he wrote is still a bunch of crap. So I may even just reach out to the guy. He does have his email address published somewhere here, and ask him if he's going to actually go some length to fixing that. I believe in some of the thread here, and I will link to the thread, he said that, look, they weren't paid by the CAs for this, but it does look like they're affiliate links, and I would imagine, based on what others have said, read the thread and decide for yourself, that the ultimate goal here was to earn money from affiliate links. And I guess the thing that feels like so totally dirty here is that, look, marketers are going to market. We get that. And I'd be okay if they sort of went, hey, we're going to link to a bunch of commercial ones, disclosure, we will actually earn some money if you click through to it. Look, I'm certainly very cautious that I mention when I've got vested interest in whatever it is that I promote or share or whatever it may be. I would like to see the transparency here, and I would like to see the inaccuracies in the story fixed, because this is absolute crap. And I will go back to archive.org and have a look at this and see what actually changed, and I'm going to put a note of that in the notes for this video. So, this kind of went a little bit out of order, but I made that comment here. Now, someone else has chimed in. Screw it, I'm going to link to this guy's tweet as well, because I just don't know what his issue is. He says, "Nice thread and drama. I like it. I believe Let's Encrypt is fine, but calling it largest CA isn't correct. What metric is used for this term?" There just seems to be amongst some people a real Let's Encrypt bashing theme. And anyway, there's just a ridiculous conversation that ensues from this, which effectively culminates in Scott Helm going, well, here's the frickin' figures. So Scott's crawler does go through and crawl the Alexa Top 1 Million every single night. One of the things it crawls is which certificate authorities have issued which certificates. Someone, Peter Bowen here, has gone and done a really nice summary of the percentage of the Alexa Top 1 Million which has had certificates issued from different CAs. Let's Encrypt has issued 38% of the certificates being used by the top 1 million websites. Next biggest is Sectigo, which includes all the Komodo certs that are still out there, at 27%. So it's almost like pretty much sort of a 1/3 drop before you get to the next largest CA. Then there's DigiCert, GoDaddy, GlobalSign, AWS Cloud, Google, and it all goes downhill from there. So they've got, by any reasonable measure, the largest number of certificates out there in circulation, which of course makes Daniel's article from before even all the weirder. It's like, so are you going to not go to, because Let's Encrypt is entirely DV, of course all the other CAs do predominantly DV, as well as OV and EV, but are you going to say at least 38% of the web you're just not going to go to because of DV certificate? Daniel, fix the freaking article. So anyway, that was kind of fun looking at that. And then by pure coincidence, I got a DM from someone at Let's Encrypt, I think it was actually on the weekend, who said, hey, look, actually a large portion of our team is here in Minnesota, St. Paul, where I am at the moment. Would you like to catch up and have a coffee? So we did this today. I went and met Let's Encrypt, and in fact I'm now wearing my Let's Encrypt hoodie, which you can see here. It's actually a very nice hoodie. So I went and had a really long chat with three of the team just there. You can you see a photo in a tweet, which I'll link to before. They tweeted out this picture just before I started recording this video. And we just had a really, really lovely chat in a coffee shop. And yeah, honestly, they're just really nice, decent people trying to do something super cool to make the web a better place. And look, I mean, I find most people end up meeting IRL, regardless of their walks of life. You know, government people, law enforcement people, or these guys here, always tend to be really good people doing good work. But I thought it'd be interesting just to talk a bit about Let's Encrypt and some of the stuff we discussed, because I was sort of really interested to hear some of their views on things. And one of the things I was thinking about as I prepared for the keynote, where I did have this bit about Let's Encrypt, entirely coincidental to the meeting, and the bit about the likes of Comodo and the way that they've behaved with the trademark registers and things like this, is I thought, wow, it's actually really, really unusual to see Let's Encrypt or anyone representing Let's Encrypt actually engage with the really negative stuff about them that we see out there. So obviously Comodo's got a long history of this, and Trust Data Card has done some really crappy stuff around talking about how they enable phishing sites, etc. We'll come back to that. There's also the PC Mag stuff I was just talking about before. Trustico, I think I mentioned Trustico in last week's update. You know, they've got a bunch of crap out there as well. And Let's Encrypt never seems to engage with them. They basically just do what they do. And you know, in discussing it, they sort of said, yeah, well, you know, we take the high road on that. It's not a debate that they want to sort of go out and have in public. And besides, there's people like Scott and I who are actually happy having that debate in public. So I thought that was it was a mature, ethical way of handling things. One of the things that was interesting is to sort of hear about how efficiently the whole place runs. I mean, they run a very small team, but per the figures before, they're supporting a massive portion of the web. I mean, they're becoming a really critical part of the web. But they work super efficiently. They don't have a heap of the overhead that a lot of these other CAs do. I mean, they certainly don't have a marketing engine, put it that way, at least not in this way. They do need to go out and get funding and donors and things like that. But they're not out there trying to sell all the certificates for all the money. So the people that they do have seem to be really focused on what they do. And what they do, they do enormously efficiently. So that was pretty interesting. We did have a good talk about the phishing stuff as well, because one of the criticisms which is frequently levelled at Let's Encrypt is that they're enabling phishing. And look, I mean, Scott and I have argued vehemently against this for a long time. In fact, Scott wrote a piece about how we want more phishing sites to have certificates because they're much more visible. They then pop up in certificate transparency logs and they're much easier to identify. But you know, when I talk it through with the people that are sort of involved in the coalface of this, the logistics and the practicality of actually doing any sort of revocation or monitoring of phishing sites and then revocation of certificates really just doesn't hold water. And one of the first problems is, how do you know that a site is going to be a phishing site? Because often a domain will stand up, domain's there, domain's registered, get the certificate, there may not be a site there. Now, it's not like these phishing sites are generally like paypalphishing.com. You know, it's going to be something completely different. And in fact, one of the things I'd really be interested to do, if anyone out there has this information, I would love to look at known phishing sites, like in volume. So for example, if we could get them from Google Safe Browsing or something, I'd love to see a list of those domains and see how many of them actually adhere to patterns which you could even feasibly whitelist. You know, how many of them do contain the word PayPal or easy deviations of it? I think that'd be really interesting to see. So anyway, there's a whole thing about how do you actually identify what a phishing site is to begin with, say based on domain, because I've certainly heard people say, oh, Let's Encrypt should just block any, or not necessarily block, but like human verify any domain that has the word PayPal in it. That doesn't make sense, because all you do is you change the word. And it's not just like block that and homographic examples, because there are just so many different ways that you can misrepresent that name. Plus, we know that people are absolutely lousy at actually reading and understanding URLs anyway, so you could change the name quite significantly. And of course, if you really want to have PayPal in the name, just go and register a certificate, or rather register a domain, which would be like fastsupport.com, go and get a wildcard certificate and then put whatever the hell subdomain you want on it, and that's not going to go into the CT logs and everything else anyway. So there was that piece. Then there's the bit about actually deciding, even when the site is up, is it actually a phishing site? I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there which isn't clearly identifiable as being phishing versus a shady site versus something else that is otherwise legitimate, but maybe we just don't like. If you were to do that, you're going to have a human, you're going to have overhead, and that's going to add more and more to the process, which is then going to make them much less efficient at what they do, and they're still a not-for-profit operating on what is really a shoestring for what they do. So that really didn't make a lot of sense. Then there's the fact that a lot of phishing sites are very transient. They come and they go very, very quickly. They also get submitted into Google Safe Browsing very quickly. ISPs block them very quickly. AV blocks them very quickly. And to quantify what we mean by very quickly, I'd love to see stats. Again, if anyone has figures, please leave a comment. But yeah, we're talking about very often just a matter of days. So you've got this very, very small window of transient sites. You'd need human review anyway to establish whether they're a phishing site or not. And then we've got other controls to be able to handle this. Not to mention the fact that there are web hosts that can pull hosting. There's also registrars that can pull domain names. Like, there's a bunch of different ways we can deal with this. And the beat up on Let's Encrypt really seems to come from the same sorts of organisations that were trying to trademark their name. So, well, got that off my chest. It was just really, like, the more you think about it and the more you probe away, does this actually make sense? This argument makes sense. The less sense it actually makes. Other things I thought were very interesting is that because they are a not-for-profit, they're not out there to make money, their priorities are just really, really different. So, we had a little bit of a chat about things like, I think the way I put it was some people have raised the concern that there's maybe effectively a monopoly being established by Let's Encrypt. They're owning a significant portion of the certificates on the web. What would happen if there was, say, a DigiNotar style event? So for those of you who didn't see it, DigiNotar was a Dutch certificate authority that got owned really seriously by the Iranian government. A whole bunch of fraudulent certificates issued. They basically got shut down and distrusted everywhere overnight. If that happened, a massive portion of the web would break. How do they feel about that? And because they're not out there to control the market, they would be very happy to see other certificate authorities playing a role, gaining prominence. And I sort of said, look, it'd be great to see, like, for argument's sake, a European-based free and open CA stand up and start issuing certificates. And because of the way the ACME protocol works, so this is the protocol which allows you to issue certificates automatically and install them on the server, it'd be very easy to fall over from, say, Let's Encrypt to one of the other providers as well. Reminds me, I just put out a tweet before, a retweet. When we're talking about ACME and free CAs and all this sort of thing, the tweet here was, I retweeted someone, I want to get the whole thing. Ole Malhus. I've murdered that name, sorry mate. This is really cool, a commercial CA offering free certs using the ACME standard. And this is from Bypass, which is a Norwegian CA. So there is another CA out there giving free certs using the ACME protocol. And from Let's Encrypt's perspective, they would think this is great because they're not out there wanting to own the market, they're out there wanting to make free and ubiquitous certificates available. And this is great from the perspective of people running web infrastructure that want to have choices as well. You don't have to get a Let's Encrypt certificate, and frankly, I don't really care if someone goes and gets a Sectigo certificate. I don't even care if they pay money and get an EV certificate from Sectigo. What I care about is that it's done with the full consciousness of what EV does and what it does not do. And the way it's being represented by all these other organisations is where the FUD is, and that's the sort of stuff that PC Mag was spreading. So that's what really upsets me. So anyway, yeah, going back to the ACME protocol sort of stuff, having more CAs that support this protocol, having more options means that if you're an organisation going, look, I'd say really like to get a Let's Encrypt certificate, but I'm worried about a DigiNotar style event, which of course could happen to any commercial CA as well. I'd like to have options. Well, great, let's have a good selection of different CAs that are all free and open and accessible via the same protocol. And then you can always roll from one to the other to issue a cert if you need to, if they disappear, or if, let's say, you need to rapidly revoke a certificate and get a new one, and Let's Encrypt has this really unexpected moment of downtime or something like that. So I love the fact that they just want to see the rising tide kind of lifting everyone, and they're not motivated, in short, to screw other people over, like some of the other CAs we've been discussing. So I'll link to the bypass one as well, because that's quite interesting. Like, it's cool to actually see another CA doing this. There, someone did point out there is a little bit of FUD on their site about EV. They're still commercial, they're still got to make money, so perhaps not quite in the same boat as Let's Encrypt, but a step in the right direction. We're not going to sort of fix this thing overnight. So that's pretty much it from here. That was really a bulk of my focus this week. Ended up being very coincidentally on the Let's Encrypt stuff. So last thing, sponsored by Varonis this week. Varonis is plugging their Enemy Within free course written by myself, going back a year or two, something like that. So this is a course about insider threats and the things you should be conscious about in terms of people within your organisation either going rogue and doing nasty things, or having machines compromised and then bad things happening under their identity, but they're still nice people, or all sorts of other things that can happen from within your organisation. And there's lots of mitigating controls we can add to this. Like, just off the top of my head, things like, this is why we have things like the principle of least privilege. Like, let's just give people only the right amount of privileges they need to do their job, so that if they go bad, or if they get malware on their machine or something, the limits of what they have access to makes things not as bad as they might be otherwise. So that's it for me. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do this from New York next week, or whether it's just going to be a late one from back in Australia. So I don't know what side of the world I'll be on when I do the next one. Thanks for watching this one. I hope you found particularly the Let's Encrypt stuff interesting. And if you do have questions or comments on that, please drop them in the comments on the blog. Thanks, folks.